assigned to discuss about the policies of agrarian reform. Here are the members: Christian Lasula, Chris Vincent Basilisco, John Paul Caldino, John Dirama, Johnny Mutia, Ralph Ramos, Ray Mundo, Richard Glepa, and Chofilo Camerino Jr. Agrarian reform is essentially the certificate of whole system of agriculture, an important aspect of the Philippine economy. My explanation is, it is because agrarian is the most common work and known especially in the rural areas. The Philippine economy population is employed more than half in agricultural sector. Agrarian reform is centered on the relationship between production and the distribution of land among the farmers. So as a whole, agrarian is very important to us. It has a big specific impact that can caters land reform, production and supporting service structure, public administration, social welfare, and educational instructions. It is also focused on the political and economic class character of the relations of production and distribution in farming and related enterprises, and how this connects to the wider class structure. Explanation. For me, both of these aspects are equally important for us to have a developing countries. These two significant has its own role for the agrarian reform broader than land reform. Philippines would be able to gain more than its agricultural potential and uplift the Filipinos of the agricultural sector who have been for the longest time suffering in poverty and discontent. Explanation. Agrarian reform, especially in the Philippines rural groups, it helps a lot to improve by not just remaining what the old version can do, but agrarian helps to upgrade and give wider knowledge to lessen the suffering of poverty in the Philippines, define route to solve the problem and create a better idea. That's all. Next.
Land ownership in the Philippines under Spain. When the Spaniards colonized the country, they brought with them a system of pueblo agriculture, where rural communities, often dispersed and scattered in nature, were organized into a pueblo and given land to cultivate. Families were not allowed to own their land. The King of Spain owned the land, and Filipinos were assigned to these lands to cultivate them, and they paid their colonial tributes to the Spain authorities in the form of agricultural products. Later on, through the law of indies, the Spanish crown awarded tracts of land to religious orders. Repartamentos for Spanish military as reward to their service, and 3 Spanish encomenderos thus mandated to manage the encomenda or lands given to them. Where Filipinos worked and paid their tributes to the encomendero, Filipinos were not given the right to own land, and only worked them so they might have a share of the corpse and pay tribute. The encomenda system was unfair and abuse system as compras y bandalas became the norm of the Filipino farmers working the land. They were made to sell their products at a very low price of surrender, their products to the encomenderos, who resold this at a profit. Filipinos in the encomenda were also required to render services to their encomenderos that were unrelated to farming. From this encomenda system, the hacienda system developed at the beginning of the 19th century as the Spanish government implemented policies that would fast-track the entry of the colony into the capitalist world. The economy was tied to the world market as the Philippines became an exporter of raw materials and importer of goods. Agricultural exports were demanded, and the hacienda system was developed as a new form of ownership. In the 1960s, Spain enacted a law ordering landholders to register their land holdings, and only those who know benefited from this. Lands were claimed and registered in other people's name, and many peasant families who were assigned to the land if the earlier days of colonization were driven out, out or forced to came under the power of these people who claimed rights to the land because they held a title. This is the primary reason why revolts in the Philippines were often agrarian in nature. Before the colonization, Filipinos had communal ownership of land. The system introduced by the Spaniards became a bitter source of hatred and discontented for the Filipinos. Religious orders, the biggest landowners in the Philippines, also became a main source of abuse and exploitation for the Filipinos, increasing the rent paid by the Filipino on a whim. Filipinos fought the Philippines Revolution in a confluence of motivations, but the greatest desire for freedom would be the necessity of owning land. Upon the end of the Philippines Revolution, the revolutionary government would declare all large landed estates, especially the confiscated friar lands as government property. However, the Philippine Republic was short-lived. The entrance of the Americans would signal a new era of colonialism and imperialism in the Philippines.
Now, we move on to land ownership in the Philippines under the Americans. The Americans were aware that the main cause of social unrest in the Philippines was landlessness, and they attempted to put an end to the deplorable conditions of the tenant farmers by passing several land policies to increase the small landholders and distribute ownership to a bigger number of Filipino tenants and farmers. The Philippine Bill of 1902 provided regulations on the disposal of public land. So ang kining Philippine Bill of 1902 ang sulod ani ang paghatag og paghatag og yuta og titulo sa mga farmers or mga Filipino farmers gikan sa mga yuta nga way na nag-iya niini. So, a private individual may own 16 hectares of land while corporate landholders may have 1,024 hectares. Americans were also given rights to own agricultural lands in the country. So, bahalag ang atuan nga country but nadyo'y katungod ang Amerikano nga man nag-iyag yuta diri sa atong nasod. The Philippine Commission also enacted Act No. 496 or the Land Registration Act, which introduced the torrent system to address the absence of earlier records of issued land titles and conduct accurate land surveys. So ang Philippine Commission nagkuan balaod, naghimog balaod nga maoy mo mango sa paghatag og mga yuta nga maoy ikaginhawa sa atong mga Pilipino. Next, in 1903, Homestead Program was introduced, allowing a tenant to enter into the agricultural business by acquiring a farm of at least 16 hectares. This program, however, was limited to areas in northern Luzon and Mindanao, where colonial penetration had been difficult for Americans, a problem inherited from the Spaniards. So pagka niadtong 1903, ang kining homestead program gipagawas aron ang atong mga Pilipino nga way mga titulo matagan niini og tagsa-tagsa ka mga titulo nga nagsukod og tag 16 hectares. Land ownership did not improve during the Americans period. In fact, it even worsened. Because there was no limit to the size of land holdings people could possess, and the accessibility of possession was limited to those who could afford to buy, register, and acquire fixed property title. So taghatagan ang katong mga way mga ika ika ikaparehistro no sa ilang mga titulo na sila dagang mga requisitos aron kini mailaha. Formal jud nga mailaha. Next are the Sakdal or Sakdalista uprising. It was a peasant rebellion in Central Luzon that lasted for 2 days, starting May 2 and end in May 3, 1935. It was easily crushed by government forces then, but these historical events of the social inequality brought by issues in the land ownership and tenancy in the country. So sakdal mo nilang gihimo aron nga maproteksyonan ang mga manag-iya og yuta laban sa mga manaot nila. The Filipino word o sakdal means to accuse, which is the title of the newspaper helmed by Benigno Ramos. He rallied support from Manila and nearby provinces through the publication, which led to the establishment of the Partido Sakdalista in 1933. So, I don't know what is sakdal, pero ang ako makadungog ko ng sakdal is sa kasagaran ni sa korte man jud. They demanded reforms from the government such as the abolition of taxes and equal or common ownership of land. Among others, they also opponent the dominant Nationalista Party acceptance of gradual independence from the United States and instead demanded immediate severance of ties with America. During the years of Commonwealth government, the situation further worsened as peasant uprising increased and landlord-tenant relationship became more and more disparate. President Quezon laid down a social justice program focused on the purchase of haciendas, which were to be divided and sold to tenants. His administration also created the National Rice and Corn Corporation to assign public defenders to assist financed court battles for the rights to the land. So katong nasa gipasa nga balaod si President Quezon ay dili balaod kundi kining marag corporation, National Rice and Corn Corporation nga mao'y mangu sa mga reklamo sa kisa manggaling na problema sa paghatag-hatag sa yuta. Homestead program also continued through the National Land Settlement Administration. So ang kining mga ang katong corporation nagpadayon hangtod nga nahimo ang National and Land Settlement Administration.
Morning everyone. Our topic for today is about agrarian reform. Post-war interventions towards agrarian reform. President Manuel Rojas' administration. Rehabilitation and rebuilding after the war were focused on providing solution to the problem of the past. The administration of President Rojas passed Republic Act No. 34 to establish the 70-30 sharing arrangement between tenant and landlord, respectively, which reduced interest landowners' loans and tenants at 6% or less. The government also attempted to redistribute hacienda lands, falling prey to the woes of similar attempts since no support was given to small farmers who were given lands. So, Rojas passed the Republic Act No. 34. During the war, Rojas served the pro-Japanese government by acquiring supplies of rice for the Japanese army. Although Rojas was successful getting rehabilitation funds and rebuilding out of devastation brought about the war was started. So, we talk about also the President Elpidio Quirino administration. Under the term of President Elpidio Quirino, the Land Settlement Development Corporation or LISDECO was established to accelerate the expand the settlement program of peasants. This agency later on became the National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Administration, or NARA, under the administration of President Ramon Magsaysay. So, Elpidio Quirino was part of Agrarian Reform Agenda. President Quirino issued on October 23, 1950, Executive Order number 355, which replaced the National Land Settlement Administration with Land Settlement Development Corporation, or LESDECO, which take over the responsibilities of the Agricultural Machinery Equipment Corporation.
So now let's move on to agrarian reform efforts under Marcos. President Marcos declared martial law in 1972, enabling him to essentially wipe out the landlord-dominated Congress. Through his technocrats, he was able to expand executive power to start fundamental restructuring of government, including the efforts in solving the deep structural problems of the countryside. So, ang gideclare si President Marcos og martial law pagka 1972 katong sa panahon nga si Marcos nagtanungkulan diri sa Pilipinas. Unya muna ni karon pod na mga tiguang nga mga kontra ni Marcos muning mahadlok sila kung nay mga kaliwat ni Marcos nga mga mupungko sa gabinete or sa mga katong sa gobyerno. Next is the Presidential Decree number 27 or the Code of Agrarian Reform of the Philippines became the core of agrarian reform during the Marcos regime. So kini Presidential Decree number 27 no kini gihimo ni nga balaod no under the Presidential Decree sa panahon ni Marcos nga administrasyon. Next, we talk about the primary source or Presidential Decree number 27. Unsa man gyud nasod ang Presidential Decree number 27? Napasa na siya nung pagka October 21, 1972. First is that this shall apply to tenant farmers of private agricultural lands primarily devoted to rice and corn under a system of sharecrop or lease tenancy, whether classified as landed estate or not. Second, the tenant farmer, whether in land classified as landed estate or not, shall be deemed owner of a portion constituting a family size farm of 5 hectares if not irrigated and 3 hectares if irrigated. Then next, in all cases, the landowner may retain an area of not more than 7 hectares if such landowner is cultivating such area or will not cultivate it. So, tagsa ka mga tao ani, dili gid mo lapas og tag 7 hectares. So, under ni siya 7 hectares ang madawat sa tagsa ka mga tao. Next, for the purpose of determining the cost of the land to be transferred to the tenant farmer pursuant to this decree, the value of the land shall be equivalent to 2.5 times the average harvest of 3 normal crop years immediately preceding the promulgation of this decree. The total cost of the land, including interest at the rate of 6% per annum, shall be paid by tenant in 15 years of 15 equal annual amortization. So, in this case, no, na sila interest no makadawat og yuta na interest og tag 6% per annum. I don't know what is this, but I don't know. 15 years ang equal annual amortization ano eh. Next, in case of default, the amortization due shall be paid by the farmers cooperative in which the defaulting tenant farmer is a member, with the cooperative having a right of recounts against him. The government shall guarantee such amortization with shares of stock in the government-owned and government-controlled corporation. No title of land owned by the tenant farmers under this decree shall be actually issued to a tenant farmer unless and until the tenant farmer has become a full-fledged member of a duty-recognized farmers cooperative. So dili ka kadawat og yuta kung dili ka member ani nga farmers cooperative. Next, title to land acquired pursuant to this decree or the land reform program of the government shall not be transferable except by the provision of this decree, the Code of Agrarian Reform, other existing laws and regulation. Lastly, the Department of Agrarian Reform through its secretary is hereby empowered to promulgate rules and regulation to the implementation of this decree. So, ang Department of Agrarian Reform mao'y maghatag og mga luna or maghatag og titulo sa mga tao nga nanginhanglan niini.
Hello guys, our topic for today is Agrarian Reform. President Diosdado Macapagal's administration. A major stride in land reform arrived during in the term of President Diosdado Macapagal through the Agricultural Land Reform Code Republic Act No. 3844. Primary source, Declaration of Policy under RA No. 3844 or Agricultural Land Reform Code. Source, Section 2, Declaration of Policy. It is the policy of the state. Number 1. To establish owner cultivatorship and economic family-sized farms as the basic of Philippines agriculture and as a consequence divert landlord capital in agriculture to industrial developments. Number 2. To achieve a dignified existence for the small farmers free from pernicious institutional restraints and practices. Number 3. To create a truly viable social and economic structure in the agriculture conducive to greater productivity and higher farm incomes. Number 4. To apply all labor laws equally and without discrimination to both industrial and agricultural wage earners. Number 5. To provide more vigorous and systematic land resettlement and program and public land distribution. Number 6. To make the small farmers more independent, self-reliant, and responsible citizen and source of genuine strength in our democratic society. This could abolish shared tenancy in the Philippines and prescribe a program to convert tenant farmers to leases and later on owner cultivators. It also aimed to free tenants from tenancy and emphasize owner cultivatorship and the farmers' independence, equity, productivity improvement, and public land distribution. Despite being one of the most comprehensive pieces of the land reform legislation ever passes in the Philippines, Congress did not make any effort to come up with a separate bill to fund its implementation, despite that fact that it proved beneficial in the provinces where it was pilot tested.
President Diosdado Macapagal administration. A major stride in land reform arrived during the term of President Diosdado Macapagal through the Agricultural Land Reform Code Republic Act 3844. Declaration of Policy under Republic Act No. 3844 or Agricultural Land Reform Code. Declaration of Policy. It is the policy of the state to establish owner cultivatorship and the economic family-sized farm as the basis of Philippine agriculture and as consequences divert landlord capital in agricultural to industrial developments to achieve a dignified existence for the small farmers free from pernicious institutional restraints and practices, to create a truly viable social and economic structure in agriculture conducive to greater productivity and higher farm, to apply all labor laws equally and without discrimination to both industrial and agricultural wage earners, to provide a more vigorous and systematic land resettlement and program and republic land distribution, and to make the small farmers more independent, self-reliant, and responsible citizens, and a source of genuine strength in our democratic society. This could abolish share tenancy in the Philippines and prescribe a program to convert tenant farmers to leases and later on owner cultivators. It also aimed to free tenants from tenancy and emphasize owner cultivatorship and farmer independence, equity, productivity improvement, and public land distribution. Despite being one of the most comprehensive pieces of the land reform legislation ever passes in the Philippines, Congress did not make any effort to come up with a separate bill to fund its implementation despite the fact that it improved beneficial in the provinces where it.
Good day everyone, I am Raimundo and the topic that assigned is Agrarian Reform. The overthrow of Marcos and the 1987 Constitution resulted in a renewed interest and attention to agrarian reform as President Corazon Aquino envisioned agrarian reform to be the centerpiece of her administration, social legislation, which proved difficult because her background betrayed her. She came from a family of wealthy and landed clan that owned the Hacienda Luisita. On July 22, 1987, Aquino issued Presidential Proclamation 131 and Executive Order of 229, which outlined her land reform program. In 1988, the Congress passed Republic Act No. 6657 or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, which introduced the program with the same name, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. It enabled the redistribution of agricultural lands to tenant farmers from landowners who were paid in exchange by the government through just compensation and allowed them to retain not more than 5 hectares. Corporate landowners were, however, allowed under law to voluntarily divest a proportion of their capital stock, equity, or participation in favor of their workers or other qualified beneficiaries instead of turning over their land to the government. CARP was limited because it is accomplished very little during the administration of Aquino. It's only accomplished 22.5% of land distribution in 6 years, owing to the fact of Congress. Under the term of Presidential Ramos, implementation was speeded in order to meet the 10-year time frame despite of limitation and constraint in funding, logistic, and participation of involved sectors. By 1996, the Department of Agrarian Reform distributed only 58.25% of the total area target to be covered by the program. To address the lacking funding and dwelling time for the implementation of CARP, Ramos signed Republic Act number 5532 in 1998 to aim Carl and extend the program over another 10 years.
Everyone, my topic is agrarian reform, Carper and the future of agrarian reform in the Philippines. The new deadline of CARP expired in 2008, leaving 1.2 million farmer beneficiaries and 1.6 million hectares of agricultural land be distributed to farmers in 2009. President Arroyo signed Republic Act number 9700, or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with reforms. Una siya meaning sa Carper. The amendatory law that extended the deadline to 5 more years. Una siya ay pamaagi sa law nga mo deadline siya mga 5 ka tuig, di dapat pwede mo lapas. Kaya mao may nakasulat sa law nga 5 years ra kutob. Section 30 of the law also meditates that any case and or proceeding involving the implementation of the provisions of CARPBA amended, which may remain pending on June 30, 2014 shall be allowed to proceed to its finality and executed even beyond such date. Dapat ang date nga gihatag diha June 14 June 30, 2014 mo na siya mga shall be allowed, mo na siya allowed nga mga proceeding nga finality ba, mo na siya mga executed. Form 2000 to 2014, Carper has distributed a total of 1 million hectares, usa ka milyon nga hectares of land to 900,000 farmers beneficiaries after 27 years of land reform and to Aquino administrations 500,000 hectares of lands remain undistributed. The DER and the Department of Environment and Nature Resources, DENR na siya, are the government agencies mandated to fulfill CARP and CARPER. But even the combined effort of the two agencies have proved incapable of fully achieving the goal of the agrarian reform in the Philippines. The same problems have plagued its implementation government until these two challenges are surmounted. Genuine agrarian reform in the Philippines remains but dreams to Filipino farmers who have been fighting for their right to land ownership of for centuries. Once siya guys nga mga dapat na mga buhaton sa mga government until siya nga ma-challenge tang tanan. That's all.